Hey everyone, it's Midnight Specter. So since Halloween is happening soon, I wanted to talk about some of my favorite fun horror stuff. And well, that's Analogue Horror. If you don't know what Analogue Horror is, think of something like a found footage film like the Blair Witch Project, or a film from like a home movie from the 80s or 90s. If you like looking at horror content, I suggest channels like Local 58 and Gemini Home Entertainment. Both of these channels are really good examples of analog horror, and I promise you won't regret it. I grew up watching a ton of television as a kid because, well, we had dial-up for the longest time, so the best way we could consume content was on the television or playing video games. Of course, as a kid, I would see stuff that I couldn't make sense of at the time. In fact, I remember so many times of watching the television late at night and you'd scroll to the like channel 99 just because it was close to 100, and I don't even think our television went up to 100, but I went to channel 99 just to see what was on it, and it was sometimes you'd see something on there like just barely, or sometimes it'd be complete snow. But I remember one time I watched a whole entire movie, or most of a movie, on channel 99, and I thought that was so cool, and then the next morning I woke up and of course it was all snow at the time. I remember another thing I saw as a kid was a PSA for computer safety or internet safety. I wish I could find it so I could put it in here, but there's so many PSAs about internet safety and computer safety that it's probably just lost to time at this point. But the kid was using a computer, and these thorny vines would start growing out of the computer and like almost ensnaring him, and then the kid turned off the computer and ran away. Of course, me as a kid, I was super afraid of that PSA, and I would run over to change the channel on the television, and I wouldn't use the computer the whole entire day, which scared me a lot, and it ruined a lot of Saturday morning cartoons for me as a kid. Local 58 takes the style of an old television station's call signs and bumpers. Here's a clip from Local 58's video called Contingency. The first video on their channel is a station's sign-off, which I'm barely old enough to remember when stations would sign off for the night and stop broadcasting. They show a clip, or a film rather, from the United States government where they would talk about the fall of the United States and encourages United States citizens to perform one last courageous act. Once again, if you're not comfortable with the topic of suicide or the fact of the United States falling to a outside force, then I would suggest skipping this one. But the rest of the channel focuses on supernatural entities that are on the moon or from the moon, and encourages people to start looking up at the moon. Now, another channel I like is called Gemini Home Entertainment, which I haven't fully looked through their catalog of videos, but their videos are awesome from what I've seen. I've watched about maybe 4 or 5 at this point, and their videos follow the style of public broadcasting television, so kind of like that low budget sort of informational sort of video, and it cuts into surreal and otherworldly creatures. Here's a clip from their storm preparedness video, which is probably one of my favorites, just because of how scary and bizarre it is, and how you really don't know what's out there. Honestly, it's really awesome, and if you have the stomach to check out this sort of content, I urge you to go ahead and check it out. You will not regret it. Another thing I love are analog horror video games. I remember playing one of them where it was like a top-down view, and it's like either an old Commodore game or an old Atari game. It was 8-bit, and you really couldn't tell that much, but it was still really awesome, honestly. And you were either like a priest or someone investigating some sort of paranormal activity in an abandoned house. It was super awesome. I watch a lot of videos from Manly Badass Hero where he does playthroughs of a lot of different games. He does a lot of playthroughs of analog horror games as well. The most recent one he did was like a trash collecting game, and it was like set like an old sort of and it looked like an old video game, which I really loved just the aesthetic of, even though that nothing really bad or creepy happens in it. I loved Five Nights at Freddy's as well. I really enjoyed that sort of aesthetic and that art style because when I was a kid, I was a huge Chuck E. Cheese kid. Like, you could have... The only other pizza that would have topped Chuck E. Cheese pizza for me as a kid would have been Pizza Hut pizza, which of course is the staple diet of any 90s kid, honestly, at this point. I think every kid from the 90s would have said that they loved Pizza Hut pizza, especially their stuffed crust. And honestly, I wasn't afraid of the Chuck E. Cheese animatronics. I thought they were always really cool, and I was really hoping that they'd come alive and I'd get to join them on stage. Of course, I would not fare too well in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe, because I'd probably be one of the first people to get killed by one of the animatronics, especially since I kind of want to give Foxy and Roxanne Wolf a hug. So, I guess the reason why I like this sort of stuff is it gives me a sort of a sense of nostalgia from my childhood. I've always, loved the 80s and 90s aesthetic, and it's just kind of what made me feel, I guess, at home when I was a kid. It just always felt, comfortable to me, if that's the right way to describe it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this special video for Spooky Month and for this week, and I hope you stay tuned for the next video.